Okay, part two on katas. So I believe that this is why you have different interpretations for the forms, okay? They act as a simple template for a teacher to develop the art. And the teacher now has every student familiar with a base level of techniques from the art in which to work with. You will see this in more in some arts, less in others, okay? So what happens as these forms are they go down as part of the art and maybe you're three generations down the line. What happens is students lose the ability to make a distinction about what they're being taught. And you see this a lot. Students are confused. They don't even really understand what the form is. They have now been taught maybe several interpretations of the form as it came down to them from several generations, okay? And what results is this confusion about what the art really is. Is karate this secret art that has these hidden points that you learn from really the greatest teachers that are a whole other thing taught, that it's just not taught to anybody else, only when you are considered to be trustworthy? No. Okay. Is the forms just basically a very basic compendium of the techniques that have been passed down through generations? Ideally, but not necessarily, because how would you have progress if that were the case? So you have this dialectic, okay? You have an art that has all these interpretations of its base content that come down to it through the ages from different gifted teachers. And then people believe it's either one or the other, okay? When in fact, you can see that there are applications that people come out of bunkai, okay, in karate, hinka, we used to call it, that are very effective under certain conditions, that use a setup and certain points that are far from obvious, okay? I wouldn't think they were part of the forms originally, but gifted teachers that had knowledge and insight developed those forms that way. On the other hand, you have people who fight with these forms and things like Ippon, one point sparring, that have taken the forms and taken the basic techniques and really drilled them so that they're very effective on that level as well. Um, that's what actually happens in a best case scenario. In fact, what actually happens though is people often get confused. And a lot of times, what you see in these arts is people who have absolutely no concept whatsoever about what different techniques in the art really are supposed to be and how to practice them effectively. Uh, and I can give some examples of that. If you look at traditional Tai Chi and the forms, okay? Somehow in Tai Chi, over many generations, the forms were preserved and they're useful for people as a method of cultivating exercise. Okay? How do they apply in combat? Do they apply in combat? The answer to that is yes, they do. However, nobody has taught those applications for many, many generations. And well, I'm not going to go that far, but for at least a generation or so, there has been a lost part of that art in terms of how those techniques apply in combat. How do I know this? Am I some genius? No. Do you see people fighting with Tai Chi? Do you see them fighting in venues where you can see how that would be applied against a resisting opponent who is attacking them. No, you don't. Okay? And that really is what you want to look at. It doesn't mean that tomorrow, if a bunch of Tai Chi students didn't want to, they couldn't take the forms in the art and bring out the fighting applications for those arts. Okay? It's more of a social distinction than it is a matter-of-fact distinction about the effectiveness of the art, which brings me to my next point. Some of the ignorant understandings about forms and fighting, okay? First of all, forms are not fighting. You do not fight with a form, okay? A form is a base interpretation of the technique to teach it to you so that you can then take the technique and develop fighting applications, okay? It just so happens that some of these applications are more obvious than others, okay, more directly imminent to our experience and how we understand combat than others. Does that mean that they're more effective or less effective? Yes and no. Some concepts engendered by the martial arts, levels to the game, are on a higher level. They take more training and understanding to apply. Okay, it takes years to learn how to just reflexively do a technique properly. Okay, if the technique has more complexity to it, you really have to have an understanding of how to train in something that is more of a fine motor movement, okay, and be effective with it, be reflexive with it. Is it worth it? Yes, it is. It just takes training and time. So, all these things that people talk about with forms, they are possible through your training. And I'm going to conclude this with a story about that. It was said that Masoyama, who was an incredible martial artist, also had a flair for the dramatic. And a lot of the things he did were stunts. He would maybe score a bull's horn before he shutoed it, or he would do something with a brick before he broke it. So John Bloom, the late John Bloom, who was one of his most incredible students, didn't know this and actually went and did the things that Masoyama often claimed to do with a little bit of modification. The moral to the story is, if tomorrow you tell a student Tai Chi is a fighting art or ballet is a fighting art, and you train them to use it that way, they'll use it that way and they'll come up with some ways to apply it. And even though it was never used that way before, people have incredible ingenuity and creativity. So the moral to the story is, if you keep those forms for what their purpose is, to pass your art on in a manner that is a compendium that a student internalizes, then you give the student the understanding about what the form actually is, like I'm giving to you on this evening. You will find that they work. They work for what their intended purpose is. And that, my friends, will make any art a better art. Okay? Los